Hello, everyone. This is Keith Stone with the Center for Atlantic Studies, and I'm here with Greg Nagy and the members of the Cosmos Society for another Cosmos online open house. Today we're talking about Horace, specifically Horace 4.1 and 4.2, perhaps with some allusions to Pindar and Sappho, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Greg, before you get into the meat and potatoes of today, could you give us a bit of an appetizer of a background on Horace, since we're not all entirely familiar with who Horace is?
Yes, I can do that. And it's interesting that in the Horace that we will read, there is a reference to something that in today's world we would call beer nuts. The kind of appetizers you'd eat while you're drinking beer. In ancient times, it would be more like while you're drinking wine, and it's not beer nuts, but kinara, but more on that later. So as an appetizer, while you're sipping wine or beer or coffee, here's what I have to say about Horace. Horace is somebody who was a protege of VIPs in the regime of the Emperor Augustus, somebody who had such a good education in Greek literature that it's fair to say that he had all our favorite greatest hits of Greek poetry, Greek lyric poetry, internalized, hardwired almost. So when somebody like Horace refers to a lyric master like Pindar, who flourished in the 5th century BCE, whereas Horace is, of course, flourishing in the 1st century BCE, you get the best available expert in Greek poetry, better than any professor of Greek poetry today. That's how good Horace is. And that's how good somebody like Virgil is. Horace would be the #1 example of a Roman poet who has mastered the form of classical lyric, just as Virgil mastered the classical form of epic. It's funny, I can say lyric and epic for 1st century BCE, this apogee of the Roman Empire in terms of which favorite era you might want to pick. And I'm happy to say, as I say, lyric and epic. Lyric as represented by Horace, epic as represented by Virgil. I couldn't do this for 4th century BCE when Aristotle is composing his great treatise called the Poetics. There, when he's talking about various forms of poetry, today we would call them genre, I couldn't really, in all honesty, say, well, this is what he means when he says the E word, epic, or this is what he means when he says, well, he doesn't even say lyric. I can't do epic and lyric for Aristotle, even in the 4th century. I can say, yes, there is a classical form that Horace understood and internalized as lyric, just as there's a classical form that Virgil internalized as epic. In the so-called book, the 4th quote-unquote book of odes, and odes simply means song, it's a word borrowed from Greek. In this collection of compositions by Horace, he has just turned 50, and he thinks that it's practically a death sentence. When I think of my age now, I guess, it's just a different kind of age that people were worried about aging so much at age 50. My mind boggles. My old mind boggles. But I love the way he is aware of what it is to imitate classical Greek models. And in the case of lyric, classical, this is going to get very weird. classical is not 5th century. Curiously, in Athens, at the height of the golden age of verbal arts in Athens in the 5th century, the examples of what Horace would think of as lyric come from earlier eras, mostly from the 6th century and sometimes even earlier. And this is one of those sweet mysteries of Greek literary history, is that for Athenians, at the height of their literary sophistication, what Horace would call classics of lyric all come from previous generations. There's not a single contemporary superstar composer of lyric per se, as Horace would understand it, in the classical period of the 5th century. What happened? Well, what happened is that there was another medium, which you and I call tragedy. And this medium, tragedy, how shall I say it, absorbed all these lyric forms and modeled itself on earlier lyric forms. So the only contemporary, quote unquote, lyric in the classical period of Athens was to be found in the choral lyrics embedded within tragedies and comedies. How's that for a surprise? So what am I saying? In a funny way, Horace 4.2 and 4.1, I like to take them in that order, are examples of what Athenians in the 5th century would call the very best of what Horace would call lyric. I'm sorry to be zigging and zagging because I want to make it clear that the terminology that Horace was using in the 1st century BCE in imperial Roman contexts is a different world from the world of Aristotle in the 4th century and the world of high classical Greek literary production in the 5th century, where what Horace would call lyric is it can be really found easily contemporary lyric only in tragedy and comedy. Wow, that maybe was too much to say, but because Pindar is such an overwhelming example of lyric, such a hard act to follow, the fact that Horace takes on Pindar, the hardest of all lyric poets, as far as Athenians would have been concerned in the 5th century. Here's this 1st century BCE guy whose native language isn't even Greek, and who is going to channel Pindar for us. Wow. I know that you wanted me to make this shorter, but once I get started talking about this, I just can't stop. Could I just say one other thing before I give people a chance to breathe and talk? It fascinates me, just fascinates me that I can get away with running a National Endowment for the Humanities seminar on ancient Greek lyric. And I did this for several years in a row in the summers by presenting only Horace. I say, wait a minute, Horace doesn't even compose in Greek, he composes in Latin. But I say, he's internalized everything. And besides, we only have fragments of even Pindar, except for the victory odes. We certainly have only fragments of Sappho. It's another great artist that I want to talk about. And fragments for most lyrics. So I could get away with doing an intensive seminar on the Greek lyric heritage by reading only Horace. And only in translation. That was the key, because most of the people in this National Endowment for the Humanities seminar didn't know any Greek. They knew Latin, but they didn't know Greek. So, and with our group here, it doesn't matter whether you know Latin. If we can deal with a bunch of different translations. I have one here that starts, oh my God, it's so archaic. I can barely understand the English. Oh, heavens. Well, yet
You
again.
said any translation, and that's what I got.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. And that's why also, by the way, whenever I do essays, and I hope some of you had a chance to read what I published recently on Classical Inquiries, that wonderful set of postings edited by our own Keith Stone. I have this essay on 4.1, Odes 4.1 and Odes 4.2 of Horace. But even if you haven't read it for this discussion, it's okay, because I promise I'll walk you through it.
Great. That should be linked in the introductory post to this
Yes.
open house.
Excellent.
So I guess this is our moment to breathe.
Yes.
Does anyone have any questions at the moment? All right. So Greg, you can serve us the main course.
Oh,
we can continue with this metaphor.
I haven't had a chance to breathe. What is this? Well, okay. I look at the first line of the translation of Pindar, Odes 4.2. Who fain at Pindar's flight would aim on waxen wings, Iulus. He soars heavenward, doomed to give his name to some new sea. Pindar, like torrent from the steep, which swollen with rain, its banks overflows, with mouth unfathomably deep, foams, thunders, glows, all worthy of Apollo's bay. Ooh. I'm struggling to keep breathing even, my goodness. In the original Latin, Pindarum quis studet aemulari, Iulle, whoever is eager has the ambition to emulate Pindar, with the first word being Pindar. Very significant. When a lyric starts with a name, you know that the name has something special to do with the meaning of the composition. I immediately latch on to the word aemulari, emulate, because this word is not just a matter of imitation. It does not just convey the idea of imitation. It conveys the idea of trying to be an other self to a previous self, trying to replicate the identity of somebody who came before. Aemulus. That's the noun, sometimes translated as emulator. And then aemulari, the verb, to emulate. But the root, aem, A-E-M, of aemulus and aemulari, which we translate as emulate or imitate, is related to another word that we have to think about in Latin, which is imitor. That's I-M and then I-T-O-R, I imitate. And that's where we get the English word imitate. Imitor, imitare, imitatus sum. And what I'm saying is, if you do Indo-European linguistics, it becomes clear that the root, AEM, that we translate as emulate, and the root I am, which we translate as imitate, are the same root if you go all the way back to the earliest possible reconstructible phases of the Latin language, by way of comparing other languages, including Greek, including Germanic, Slavic, and so on. Well, Um, there's one other root I want to bring in, which is the root of the word, the Latin word imago, which gives us the English borrowing image, which is again, I am, the same thing as the I am in imitor, imitari, the imitation word, and which is a variation on the root of aem, as in aimulari, to emulate. So what am I saying is that the English words emulate, imitate, and image, all those three English words go back to Latin words that share the same root. Somehow, all these meanings have to be reconstructed back to some common foundation, some common foundation of meaning. And this is something that has been successfully done in the realm of historical linguistics. So now let me explore a little bit more what emulate really means. It's not just trying to be the other self. It's trying to replace that self with your own self. So that means if somebody is imitating you, sure, it's a compliment, and my ego is very gratified, but there's a little bit of a worry that this person wants to take your identity and own it themselves. So in a way, it can lead to a loss of your own identity. And I think the way to say this in a way that will comfort us is imago, image. If you look at the oldest examples of this word in Latin, means not just any image, it's, get this, the death mask of your ancestor. And this was an old Roman habit where in various ceremonial situations where you are taking the place of an ancestor and you are performing some ritual act that has meaning for society, that connects by way of your own meaning to the meaning of your ancestor, you'll be actually wearing the mask of your ancestor, and that would be called an imago. To put it nicely, when you want to live up to what the ancestor means, you put on the mask of your ancestor. And I think many of you, even if you're not very familiar with the Latin language, will be sort of impressed with all these names that Romans have that have to do with numbers. Can I give an example? Quintus, which means the fifth, or what's another good one? Septimus, the seventh. Or let's do it for a woman, Octavia, the eighth. What's going on here? Is this a matter of parents naming their children, oh, this is number one, and then some another child is born 2 years later, this is number two? No. This is not doing numerology horizontally, so to speak, but vertically. It means that if you're septimus, seventh, it's the fact that your parents modeled you to be somebody who should live up to the identity of an ancestor 7 generations removed. How's that? Isn't that beautiful? And that means that when you're wearing the death mask of your ancestor, if you're Septimus, you'd be wearing the face of the ancestor who was 7 generations ago. I find that so gorgeous.
Wow.
This habit happens in India too. They have a name for it in India, just as they have a name for everything, which is sapinda. And by the way, while we're on the subject of Quintus, did you know that that character, the real life historical character in the Christian New Testament, Pontius Pilate, Pontius Pilatus. The Pontius name is an italic variation. By italic, I mean something that's not Latin, but it's cousin, linguistic cousin with Latin. In this case, Oscan. It's the Oscan word, Pontius, for Quintus. So Pontius is a number 5, or a 5th one, Pontius Pilate. Well, I'm only on line 1, my goodness, of Horace 4:2. We have to speed up. But what this whole poem is saying is Pindar is bigger than all of us. Anybody who wants to emulate Pindar, that is to say, to produce a poetic self that somehow lives up to the model, which is Pindar, and for people like Horace, that was the ultimate model of lyric. That person has to be hardwired with all the traditions of lyric, which means that that person has to be inspired the way the lyric master said that he was inspired. And the inspiration comes from Apollo, ultimately, and from Apollo's muses, secondarily. And that's what you see here. So that's how it starts. And then
So I bet you're going to say that Horace was successful in replacing Pindar, given that you said that you gave a seminar on Pindar by studying Horace.
Yes, I do say it. I think he did it pretty well, and that's why I can get away with doing a whole seminar on classical Greek lyric without even touching the Greek, because it's too fragmentary or too difficult, or most people can't handle the Greek, or the translation is too unwieldy. And I can just go to the Latin and not be sued for malpractice. It's a lot of fun.
So I got a question about the next 3 lines.
Excellent. Go for it.
So who is Ulius, or is that Icarus? Because I never heard of Ulius. And if you look at the Latin, it
Yes.
mentions Dandalus.
Yes.
What is the next 3 lines about? I don't remember a C by the name of Elias.
Well, this person is in this particular situation, how shall I say it, the patron of the occasion, is that the lyric poet is honoring somebody who is worth honoring as a patron. And so here the poet is the protege. So Iulus is a Roman patron, a young man. And then as for Daedalus is the great artisan who created special wings for humans to fly with. And he of course, as this ultimate artisan in Greek myth, fashioned a lot of other marvelous contraptions. In a way, he is a mythological analog to the historical reality that is Leonardo da Vinci. He is the big technological inventor. And he makes a set of wings not only for himself, but also for his son, Icarus. But the wax that is used for attaching the wings of the son, Icarus, melts, because Icarus, being the young and overly experimental son of Daedalus, Icarus flies too close to the sun, and the sun's heat melts the wax, and so he plunges into the sea, and drowns and causes eternal sorrow for the father, who at that point is so upset that he cannot bring himself to come down from the ethereal realms where he keeps on flying, keeping a safe distance from the sun. So, according to the myth, after Icarus drowns in the sea that is named after him, which is a part of the Aegean called the Sea of Icarus, Daedalus just can't bring himself to make contact with planet Earth again. And so he's circling in the stratosphere forever and ever. This is where Virgil, the master of epic, comes in. In Virgil's Aeneid, scroll 6, we hear how Daedalus just can't bring himself to, may I put it this way, come back down to earth, until one fine day, as he's circling in the stratosphere, he spots the most beautiful place on earth, which is the Bay of Naples, north of the Bay of Sorrento. Isn't that something? The Bay of Naples. And he just circles and circles and circles, and finally he makes contact with land again, despite all his sorrow, because this is the most beautiful place on earth. And of course, it's the sacred place of Apollo. So you see how Apollo is involved here. If you're soaring too high up in your ambitions so that your wings get detached because the wax that attaches the wings to your body melts, you've gone too far. And a lyric master must never go that far. He has to go as possibly far up as he can, but not that far, because that results in death. And of course, Horace is obsessed with death in 4-2 because it's his 50th birthday. Ooh, ooh, ah.
Still, it all seems like a very strange lesson to teach in the opening lines. Either you're dooming your patron or you're dooming yourself, depending on how you want to interpret that.
Well, but this is my opportunity to switch a little to Sappho, arguably the greatest master of the greatest female master of lyric, and I would say greatest all-round master of lyric. In Sappho, if you look at her song 44, which seems to be a song that celebrates a wedding, Sappho's song itself is celebrating the wedding of Hector and Andromache, and we know from Iliad 6 that that's a doomed marriage because of the horrible things that happened to Hector at the hands of Achilles, and then the degradation and humiliation that is experienced by Andromache as a prisoner of war. So why would Sappho be celebrating this happy event in the life of a doomed couple? The happy event being the contemporary wedding or whatever it was that was being celebrated. But this happens all the time in classical lyric, is that what's being narrated may be heartbreakingly sad, but it can still be happening in a very happy, celebratory situation. The great Russian ethnographer Vladimir Prop, who studied just hundreds and hundreds of wedding songs in rural Russia between the two big world wars. He would not only collect the songs, but he would interview people after weddings, or sometimes maybe 50 years after a wedding. And, well, Grandma, what was it like when you were married? Oh, they were singing beautiful, sad songs about unrequited love and death and whatever. And it was so sexy, so wonderful, so beautiful. So it's an aesthetic.
May I ask something Greg.
Please. Oh, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy to see you here. Oh my goodness. And you know what I have to show you?
No, please, not again. I think it's okay. Oh, continue. Okay.
It's for the rest of you, it's our wonderful colleague's daughter's notebook, which I have on loan.
This is our running joke. This is the thing that goes around. Okay. No, but I mean, with Sappho, it's actually, we can discuss, you know, there is a kind of always masochistic tendency of some cultures, even, you know, nowadays in modern Greek culture, you know, that you experience, you entertain yourself in the most, let's say, happiest moment of your lives by listening to very sad narratives, which is, if I'm around with other people who don't understand modern Greek and I have to translate what we are just, you know, listening to, they think we are a psychopath. So this is one thing. But you know, for
Yes.
Hector and Andromache, you know, in particular, you know, actually Sappho is actually praising, you know, the union, and the union was perfect, was complete. So, and to this respect, you can let it go. But I want to go back to Horace, if I may. Perhaps it is of importance to mention that, you know, the fourth book doesn't come chronologically, really immediately after the other three. So there is a pause,
Yes,
and actually after Augustus' really very demanding
yes.
expectations to Horace, he has to deliver the fourth book, some odes. There he tries to excel himself. He composes 15 in a kind of way of really not showing off, but really trying to show what he can do. 8 meters, out of which one new for the system then. So it's a particular achievement. He's 50, so there are things going on, I think, with him about his art and so on. And there is, you know, in his first book, in one, he very particularly consistently and very concretely says, I would like to you to insert me, and he uses both the Greek and the Latin words for lyrical poets. He likes lyricus and vates, no? So he's very aware of his position, you know, the genre. He wants to build, you know, his reputation. He's very aware and confident that he can. And then after this break, he comes and say, okay, the one who tries to imitate or go, you know, further, there is a risk. And I can understand, I can sympathize, not because I question his talents or his competence, but, you know, there is a lot of going on. And just my last remark is that there is, to that, there is, you know, this wonderful idea of yours about imitation and imago, and in a way reposting yourself in the position of your of the person you want to imitate, and at the same time dislocating, you know, the original. And this is what happens in Rome if you have Greece as your example. And there is a moment of awareness of how do we deal with Hellenization in Rome, and this is where Augustus comes and says, well, we bring Apollo, he's our, you know, house god, and we take it from there. And this is where I find Horace as well takes it. But that will be my input for the moment. So thank you.
It's a beautiful observation, and I'm so glad, dear colleague, that you brought us also to Horace Odes 1, where, as you say, he explicitly describes himself as somebody who aspires to the greatness of the lyrical canon of the Greeks. Exactly. And you know, it took me eternities to figure out what the English metaphor pushing the envelope was. I always thought pushing the envelope, I mistook the metaphor, was taking a thick envelope and trying to push it under a door, and oh, it won't fit. There are too many pages in it. But of course, pushing the envelope is testing how high you can get, and at what point will your head hit an envelope where you can't go any further. And if you go any further, you break the glass, so to speak, if it's a glass ceiling. And that's what Horace is meditating on or the voice of the poet, I should say, is meditating on in Horace Odes 1:1. And you know, as I look at how much time I spent on the first few lines of 4:2, what if I now try to spend some time on the last few lines of 4:1, which is where the poet is how shall I say it, pursuing the sweet bird of youth. There's you know, why am I weeping, and how I am following the volucrem, the bird, etc., etc., etc. And I think that already in 4:1, he is exploring the poetics of flying too high by pursuing models that are testing the limits. I also think of this wonderful line in Dante, verso il cielo, aiming at the sky, which is what the poet, with his vision of the poetic mission, is doing. And of course, the bird of youth, if I can go back to 4:2, is the swan of Apollo. And I love the fact that the swan is associated with the god Apollo, partly because of what the song is that the swan sings at the moment of his death. And we're familiar with that classical trope, especially from Plato's Phaedo, where Socrates is talking about the myth or the folk saying that the swan sings its most beautiful song at the moment of death. And what I'm saying is that there's a kind of testing of mortality, and we see how Icarus dies if he pushes towards the ceiling, or should I say verso il cielo, too far, and that how you have to come down to earth in some ways, as Virgil's epic does. But all of this bird imagery, I think, pervades both 4:1 and 4:2. And we started with beer nuts. Well, Kinara is not only a beer nut, it's also an aphrodisiac. So the fact that Horace personifies an idealized woman who could be the object of his feelings of sensual learning, the fact that he objectifies this woman as Kinara, that's no beer nut, that's an aphrodisiac. And it has to do with, I think, the lyric tradition of the artichoke. And artichokes are very big in the poetics of Sappho and Alcaeus as a symbol of a time when passions are at their peak. So many things going on, dear friends, and it's funny how there are poems in English which are so fascinated with the same mythologized or imagined female called Kinara. So even I can't get into it now, but you can look at it maybe in the write-up that I do in Classical Inquiry. But even the expression "gone with the wind" has something to do with it. But let's not go there now. So going back to your point, I love the fact that you are saying, look, this is not just something that happens, this ambition of becoming a lyric genius. It's something that happens not only in 4:1 and 4:2 of the odes, It happens already in one of the odes.
Well, as we're getting closer to the end here, I'd like to make sure that I invite all of you in particular to ask any questions that you may have.
I see one. I see one about the male lover, and it just came up as a cartoon balloon.
Oh yes, I see.
Over the head of Hélène. So I'm reading Hélène's thoughts.
Why is the male lover in Roman poetry, to regain his potency, must borrow the attributes of soldiers?
Well, it's a double bind because there's a verbal play with the soldier being tough, so duros, and Roman poets being Roman poets, the idea of getting hard, and I'm talking about the sexuality of erections and all of that. That's also duros. But of course, what the lyric master knows, that that kind of thing is not necessarily attractive to the person you want to be attractive to, and you have to be soft. And so there's all of this tension between hardness and softness, and how that fits in with the ideal of lyric situations, which lend themselves to not just love, but falling in love and being attractive. And what I'm especially thinking about here, this is so typical of Romans, that for a Roman, the word that, well, we would say in English, business. You know, when you're doing your business, you're performing your duties, or your earning, or whatever, that's negotium, and which we get the word negotiate from, right? Negotium is your work mode, your professional mode. But otium is when you have leisure, when you don't have to be on. And now I'm going to ask all of you, if you have the time, to look at Catullus 51, because we can't talk about Roman lyric without talking in the same breath about Catullus. Horace is not enough. You have to say Catullus and Horace. And in particular, since we didn't really get to talking enough about Sappho today, now, and because Sappho is such a favorite for me, do look at Catullus 51, which is an imitation of Sappho 31. And in Catullus 51, he talks about what is for Sappho the ideal mindset, worldview for lyric, which is, how shall I say, luxury, luxuriance. The Greek word is habrosune, but Catullus translates that as otium, which is the opposite of negotium, opposite of business. The business of being a soldier, a businessman, an orator, a politician, whatever. And usually imagined in male world, not in female world. But that also means that if you're in the realm of habrosune and otium, you get into a lyric and feminized mode, and therefore being durus, being harsh like a soldier, a brave soldier in the war of love, is not going to get you many points with the ladies, if I can put it that way. I'm a little worried. I get stunned silence from you. I hope there are more reactions.
Well, my microphone was muted, so I was trying to say. I see another question in the sidebar.
Yes.
Comment plus question. I was pleased to read a poem about an old person's experience of love. It is interesting you said book 4 represents a return to poetry after a break. Mm-hmm. Is there a parallel between returning to poetry and returning to love?
Ooh, nice, nice. yes, to true love, and not, shall I say, sort of the the erotics of machismo, but something that is inclusive and that addresses the feelings of not just Mars but Venus. Can I put it that way? Yeah. I love that. Yes, it is a return.
So, do you think the Latin poets, in their attempt to surpass the Greek poets, are more obscure, more referential, tangible statements about myth and whatnot?
Well, I think maybe they would be if we had all of Greek lyric poetry instead of bits and pieces. I'll give you an example. What we have of Sappho is pathetically little. We're more lucky with somebody like Pindar, but even with Pindar, we've lost most of his compositions having to do with women's debutante situations called Partheneia, or with sympathetic situations. And I can think of a whole variety of things. All we have for Pindar mostly is celebration of victorious athletes, which is great, and I'm very happy and thankful that we have at least that much. But once you get past Pindar, there's really not a very full corpus of any of the canonical lyric masters, and I think that's why, I hate to say it, it's the other way around. It's the lyric masters who are more obscure because we have so little left from them. And sure, people like me will try to reconstruct that great world by looking at choral lyrics in classical tragedy and comedy, but it's just not the same thing. There are too many other things going on there. So I don't know. I think that that people like Horace, and I want to add Catullus, let me just say it that way, Catullus and Horace, if you put the two of them together, you get a much clearer rather than opaque vision of the entire repertoire of ancient Greek lyric. And listen, they were extremely conscientious in being accurate transmitters. They really channeled this poetry, and you can tell that Horace can be playful, but the mission of getting it right is dead serious.
So they're not translations, but they're channelings in some other way.
They're channelings. And the beauty is that, I don't know, for somebody like me who spent most of my life on Greek lyric and epic, I still find their channeling so true to form, because they're so faithful in the channeling that I don't feel guilty about introducing people who don't know any Greek literature to that literature via Latin literature if they know that better. It's really okay. And the other beauty thing is that even if you've never heard of Sappho or Pindar, you can still get a great deal out of Horace. Don't you find that? As some of you out there, and I don't want to have any confessional situations where I'm forcing somebody to say, well, I've never been exposed to Horace before, but or I've never been exposed to Greek lyric before, but I think you can take Horace on his own, even as he is, and still get a lot out of it. Even with stilted translations, because if I compared several of these stilted translations, I'd still be very, very happy. Oh, I see a wonderful question from, am I supposed to mention names, or I'm not supposed to mention names?
No, let's leave names off for now.
All right, it was just content. So can you read me? I just lost the bubble.
Mm-hmm. If we could rekindle a neglected sentiment, worldview, or idea, yes, from these ancient times to better our modern societies.
Yes.
what would be particularly interesting to resurrect, so to speak?
Oh,
And I suppose we could aim this particularly at Horace or Catullus.
yes, I love
What
that
from
question.
Horace or Catullus would be
I love that question.
good for us now in particular?
But is it all right if I switch gears and go from lyric to epic? I think if we read Virgil, we really see all the sorrows that happen to a society that has become so mighty that it has developed an empire, and what kind of sorrows it comes with. And there can be all sorts of really personal sensitivities that are enhanced in contexts where we might have ethical problems with how the society got the way it did. How did, my favorite example, how did Athens become an empire? And they're moral problems, but they're also amazing leaps of pushing the envelope in aestheticism. I mean, the more global you are, the more beautiful you see things. And the Roman Empire is a lens through which you can view the world so much more powerfully. But at the same time, it comes with a cost. And so I think for us, Virgil is an even better person to think with than Horace. That would be my guess. But for Horace, I just think he is a master of conjuring what a beautiful thing is, what a beautiful place is, what a beautiful person is. And that's why he has a charm for people who don't even care about Greek literature. Although, as I'm trying to show, if you know Greek literature, if you like it even more with Horace. So maybe can I end with a frivolous and almost insulting question? But suppose I've played this with friends before, so this is a game I've played before. Suppose there's some horrible disease that kills all experts in ancient Greek poetry all at once. And so they're all wiped out. And this bacteria affects only people who have had any encounter with Greek poetry. So not only am I gone, but most of you are gone. And then you have to populate the research universities of the United States with, by some miracle, resurrected versions of Horace, Virgil, Propertius, Tibullus, Ovid. Let's name those 5. I want you to torment yourself instead of counting sheep tonight, is to think which of these 5 Augustan era poets received what prestigious appointment in which great American research university. So for example, which of the 5 would get an appointment at, let's say Harvard? And an appointment in Greek literature, my friends, that's the rub. Because remember, all Greek specialists of today are now extinct. So whom would you want to be the professor of Greek lyric poetry at Harvard? And then how about Princeton? How about Berkeley? How about Michigan? And how about the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton? A little joke.
May I ask something else? I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
So just to go back, because you said, that the Latin, that the Roman poets were very conscientious and aware of their, their heritage and of their presence. At the same time, after the break, 4:1 and 4:2, first allusion to Sappho, second allusion to Pindar. And you mentioned yourself playfully, because he says, I'm coming back, but I'm doing differently. Because Sappho always addresses Venus. Here he says, Parche precor precor, just spare me. So in a way, it's the the very conscious, playful against, let's say, the form of the, against the recipe he knows, and everybody knows, and it's a different medium as well, because Sappho and her clan were composing to perform, while he composes to publish. So the allusions are so easy to go back to get, So I was just, I find it very, the imitation is not just imitation, it's just
Yes.
Using the fact that everybody knows and he knows best. This is why.
I agree with everything you say, except one little detail is you assume, and I used to assume, that Horace meant for his composition simply to be read, maybe even read silently the way we read. But there are people out there, maybe some of them go too far, although I admire them, like Wiseman. And then there are others like Derek Ettridge, who would insist that even Horace preferred to, how should I say, to read in the sense of perform his poetry. It's like the Soviet era Russian poet Yevtushenko is the poetry comes alive still in a perfect moment. It could be a small occasion, a get together, but so I'm not sure that it's meant to be read silently. I don't want to press that point too much, because I take your point, and I'm so glad you mentioned the allusion to Sappho, because I would have had nightmares tonight that I didn't mention the prekor, I pray, which is what Horace does to Venus, just as Sappho does to Aphrodite. And I think that's extremely important. So, yeah, playful. And yes, not as performative as the medium of Sappho. But still, I think there is an element of performativity that somehow it's the voice that brings the poetry to life. If you look at the testimonia about the voice of Virgil, especially from the ancient world, and some researchers have discounted this as vain romanticizing, but it's just so overwhelmingly prevalent that Virgil had a beautiful voice, and that to hear him bring to life his own words in performance was enchanting. There was an enchantment to it. And I think the playfulness is, of course, part of it, because, yes, we're being so clever. We know things. Can I give my favorite example? It's the way in Catullus 51, when he imitates Sappho, all right, he says, dulce ridentem, smiling or laughing sweetly. I should say laughing sweetly. And in the original Greek of Sappho, it's aduphone sas, which is speaking sweetly. So what does Horace do? Horace imitates both Sappho and Catullus by having dulce ridentem, dulce loquentem, both. Smiling sweetly or laughing sweetly and speaking safely. So what is he doing? Yes, it's true. He's playful. He's saying, I am correcting Catullus. The girl is not just laughing sweetly, or she's also talking sweetly, or whatever. And some experts will say, oh, this is so clever. This is so philological. This shows high I, Horace, have read both Sappho 31 and Catullus 51. I'm using our reference system, of course. But I say it's not just being a philological show-off. It's also showing how deeply he has gone and appreciated two beautiful instantiations of a gorgeous moment. And I think he's augmented it by showing that he understands the echo chamber that is classical lyric poetry, something like that.
I'd like to give the last chance for an observation or a question to some of our newer faces in the group. Can I, well, I offer you the chance if you'd like to. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to go back to the affirmation through denial idea that you have in your article for this week, 2 poems, and it reminded me of a poet number 4. Horace criticizes a free man, a libertus,
Yes.
who wants to hold who wants to sit in the first seat in the theater, etc. And in reality, Horace himself is the son of a free man, of a libertus.
Yes.
So in a way, he is criticizing himself. So he would be reenacting himself in that poem. I mean, I thought that was
very clever. Yes.
Of some of the ideas that we have in Ode 4.1 and 4.2.
Yes, I love that. I think it is absolutely true that a personality, a poetic personality like Horace, becomes the new aristocracy of the world of letters. And by letters, I mean broadly literature as brought to life by the voice. And it's a new nobility that has its own morality, a morality that transcends the pseudo-morality of socioeconomic factors. I see that so clearly, not only in Horace, but can I go all the way back to somebody like Theognis of Megara? I love the fact that already in this early form of what Horace would call lyric, there is a nobility that is no longer socioeconomic. And it's a nobility that comes from channeling the world of sublime poetry. And that's something that the great German philosopher Nietzsche understood. And that's why he thought of Theognis of Megara as the spokesperson of Greek nobility. And when Nietzsche says nobility, he certainly doesn't mean socioeconomic nobility, but nobility of the spirit. I think you're right there. And Horace would, of course, make fun of the class consciousness of the Romans. And I can't think of a society that was more class conscious. But even this society could produce such amazing poets as Horace, who transcend all of that, and who I think really are playful, yes, but playful in a respectful way of the past, really help us, along with his epic friend Virgil, find greater meanings in our own lives. That's a beautiful observation. Thank you.
If I may, Greg, do you think that lyric creates dialogue through paradox? I don't want to overgeneralize, but in these poems, doesn't he create a sort of like a negative springboard to a positive?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's the nature of the beast, my friend. It really is. It's something that not only Horace does, as far back as I can go in lyric, I see it. And could I could I use as an example something that I found in epic, and I mean the epic of the Odyssey, where Odysseus, still in disguise, is being entertained by food, drink, and good conversation, and the entertainment comes from this this swineherd, this lowly swineherd, and suddenly Odysseus, who's of course a king in disguise, is feeling this is the happiest moment of my life. This is where I'm having a good time. You could say I'm at a party and happy at a party where there's good music, conversation, food and drink and everything. And the language that he uses there, the Odysseus figure, embedded in epic, is language that I find in Pindar and in Horace, describing that moment of happiness. I even know what the word is. It's euphrosune, which literally means just feeling happy, feeling good. But it turns out to be, as we know from Elroy Bundy's book on Pindar's Poetics, page 2, euphrosune, this word for happiness, is the programmatic word for Pindar's lyrics, where when Pindar wants to say, what's the occasion of my performance? It's euphrosune. It's a special kind of happiness you feel when there is song accompanying a feast, a happy feast. That's the ultimate happiness. Isn't that wonderful? And what you said to me about the paradox of social status, or am I the first one to do this? Of course, you're not the first one to do this. That lyric moment, that exquisite lyric moment, is embedded inside one of the earliest forms of Greek literature, the Odyssey, arguably the earliest, if you count the Odyssey and the Iliad together. It's just a marvel. So I think what you're saying applies not only to Horace's lyrics, but to lyric in general, and dare I say for poetry, poetry in the sense of verbal art at a happy context. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
you, Greg,
all
for joining us another time.
Well, may I say this has been a moment of euphrosune for me, thanks to the delightful company that you have favored me with. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we hope we can repeat this occasion.
We must. I will have withdrawal fits if we don't.
All right, let's sign off for now.
Okay, bye.